Good evening. Today is June 12th. This is the regular meeting of the Rhinebeck Central School District Board of Education. I will just make a note that our president, Deirdre Dalbert, is away on a business trip, so I'll be presiding at the meeting tonight. May I have a motion to approve the minutes of the May 22nd, 2018 regular meeting?
So moved.
Second.
Any discussion or changes? Okay, all those in favor? Okay, that's unanimous. That motion passes. May I have a motion to approve the minutes of the June 5th, 2018 special meeting?
So moved.
Second.
Any discussion on those? All those in favor? That's unanimous. That motion passes. We have an opportunity for public comment. Is there any members of the public that would like to make a comment at this time?
I'm back. I'm Barbara Blue here with the elementary. I did a little bit of research, but by September when I go back to school, I'd love to see an intercom.
I knew what, Barbara? I'm sorry.
An intercom?
Yeah.
Some research, it's like $600. You can get an alarm, which is like $14. I won't even ask you for the machine. I'm asking for $2,000. Well, the biggest thing is now with the intercom, we have a lot of special ed meetings. So when a parent comes over, the only thing I know about them is what time they're coming in. I do not know who they are. I have to buzz them in and I have no clue who they are. If there was an intercom, I could say, who are you? You have a meeting? And I say, oh yeah, I have a meeting at 9:05 at his office. So when I go back in September, I hope to see. I'll leave you this. There's some estimates. I don't think I'm asking for a lot. Oh, and the other thing was, since I was here before, February 14th in Florida, there's been 46 more shootings since that day. So, but I will leave it.
But Barb, you can take that with you.
Thank
That
you
was,
very much.
let me explain why. That intercom is already in the capital project that was approved by the community back in December of 2016, and it will be installed this summer. You're welcome.
All right. Would anyone else like to make a comment? Sure. Just state your name, please.
I'm Christine Sidro, and
You can tilt that down if you want a bit. Yep.
So I have 4 kids, one in each school, and I guess I'm kind of along the same vein as Mrs. Dooley. I'm hoping what I would like to see is the school have something called a bleeding control kit. So these are kits that are mounted usually next to the AED in the school, and they have all of the equipment, all the necessary supplies in case there was some kind of a shooting. So they have things like a tourniquet, they have bandages, they've got gloves, and I guess so along with this comes a program called Stop the Bleed. I don't know if you guys have ever heard of this. This is a national program, and a lot of the schools are actually doing this. I know Duchess Bosie's program had their employees take it, and so it teaches the staff and the teachers how to use all of the things, such as the tourniquet, and what to do in the event of the shooting where they need to use that. So I would love to see the school have this. I'm not asking for anybody to purchase anything. I was hoping that I could do the fundraising for it. I was hoping to be able to write a grant to get the money for it. And I just kind of wanted to make sure that everyone was kind of on board with me and what did I think.
Laura?
May I ask a question?
Yeah.
How much does the program cost and the training?
And finally, I have someone who's willing to teach the program. So these kits they cost between $1,000 and $1,500 each. And so although I would love to see us have like one for each wing of each of the schools, that's a lot of money. And so I guess I would feel accomplished if we just got one. But yeah, they are expensive. And each kit has 8 different packs, and each pack has 8 different tourniquets, 8 different, the whole thing.
So, does the kit expire, or is
It
there a
does.
program?
Well, it expires in 5 years, and I thought about that. And I was thinking, you know, if I was able to fundraise enough money, maybe we could use the other funds to, you know, purchase new kits 5 years. It's really the quick clot that expired. I mean, like, they have restrictions on ages or whatever, but the quick clot, which, you know, is used if in the wound, doesn't seem to expire.
And how long is the training?
Like, an hour and a half, maybe. And I mean, I guess just to play devil's advocate, I wondered about the liability for the school. Like, what does the school take on by having this there? I don't know the answer to that. I know Hyde Park schools have one. in Roosevelt.
Did you talk to anybody in Hyde Park in the administration about how they
How
rolled
we
it out or
I didn't
got
talk
it?
to them, no, that's a good idea, that's a very good idea. And I did kind of reach out to a couple of different other organizations, wondering if I could maybe, you know, join with them and use their profit ID number so I could ask for the grants. I guess we could have that too, ask for the grant. So kind of waiting to hear back from them.
Diane?
Just maybe we could explain the process to her, if she wanted to, you know, if she wanted to make a donation to the school for this, like what, you know, what steps should she take next? I mean, how-
To make a donation?
Well, I mean,
To make a
I
donation of
think
a
the
product.
first thing is making sure that the school is something they would want, because it's very specific,
Right.
and then what the process would be for donation, and, you know, just so that she would know.
Yeah, I would just say that at least one of the two school safety teams has already discussed this. In fact, they were, you know, they had a kind of a temporary, a short-term plan that they might site these kits where the AEDs are, because they're spread throughout the building. But obviously, there's the issue of purchasing them and then training, which is also an expenditure. Yeah, go ahead, I'm sorry.
The training, you would have to pay the staff and the teachers, that's the cost.
Well, it depends on when you did it, so, I mean, there's lots of moving parts to that. But anyway, so it's been discussed already. In terms of making a donation, it's a case of contacting me or Mr. Brunel or probably somebody in the district office, and comes to the board, and then the board can make a decision as to whether that's a donation they wish to accept, i.e., does it cover the costs of all the, whatever. I mean, every donation's a little different in terms of whether that makes sense.
Maybe I don't understand, like, I don't want to donate money, I was actually hoping to purchase the kit.
Yeah,
Donate
you-
the kit, that works.
Either way works.
Yeah.
Whether it's
Either way.
money and we purchase it,
Okay,
or you purchase them yourselves and
I'm happy
donate
to
them
do
to the
that.
school. It can do either way. But one of the things to look at, we don't pay sales tax. We may have access to the same product, but because it's been bid out, I might be able to get it quite a bit cheaper than you
Okay.
might be able to. So we can work in concert with that.
okay, great, thanks. All right, so maybe I should just email you then and.
Yeah,
Okay,
here's,
I think I did that, email you, so you're done.
here's my information. Please contact me and we will follow up on that. and Try to see what the best way is to maximize the funds you have available.
So thank you for bringing that idea, and I look forward to working on that in the future.
You have lots of information, if anyone wanted to take a peek.
Well, you
If you
can
like,
give
you can
that
leave it
to
with the
me and
clerk.
we can get it copied and out to the principals and the nursing, and because they're the ones who are going to have to want to have that in the building, and they're on board with it also. No, you can give it to me.
I would do it through one point of contact.
And then that way I can get it out to everybody. Okay, great.
All right. Is there any other members of the public that would like to make a comment? Okay. In that case, we'll move on to the annual school data report. Mr. Krebs.
I would just say by way of introduction, not that all of you don't know who Marvin Krebs is, but we have had for quite a few years, had Marvin come to a board meeting, typically in the late spring, around when the annual school report cards issued by the State Education Department and make a presentation to the board. So tonight is that night. There you go, Mark.
Thank you.
Is it going to be up on the screen, or are we just following on here?
Marvin, you're using this screen, right? Yep.
Well, that remains to be seen. I have to make it operational.
Okay.
You're feeling particularly techie tonight?
I'm making no guarantees when I start pushing buttons.
Here. I just handed it back to you. So it's not glaring.
Yeah.
It's not giving it to me yet?
Not yet. It has it, it's there, it's just on the wrong.
There it is. It's coming up. See it? When I get in here, I'm gonna throw it to the Apple
okay.
TV
All right.
thing.
Okay, good.
Listen to me talk like I know what I'm talking about. Yes. I think it's funny that
When
I
it
talk
comes to
like,
Apple, I don't have a clue.
like I have no idea what this is gonna work or not. I'm just doing what I was told by the tech guys. Okay, it works. Okay, so you have a copy of this slide deck there in front of you. What this slide deck is me dumping into that report that you got, that's a big fat one in your packets, and I've just swiped a lot of those things and put them into the slide deck just for purposes of public conversation. I've added a lot of other things in here that I normally add into this presentation just to set a context for a discussion about data in the school district. So I always like to start these presentations with a conversation just about the district's mission, vision, and core values. And the only reason I like to bring this up is that the Rhinebeck Central School District now for many years has been a district that's engaged in comprehensive district education planning. There's a long answer to what that is, and then there's a short answer. The short answer is there's a multidisciplinary team of folks in the school district that meet usually about 3 times a year to do planning around instructional improvement and so on and so forth. It was decided some years back that this school district would try to anchor itself in a mission, vision, core values structure, and then have the goal setting and planning flow out of that. And then the student achievement side of the shop would sort of be folded into that as was appropriate. So we just finished over the last, I don't know, maybe 2.5 years, being facilitated by a gentleman named Dr. Lloyd Jager, facilitating a new CDEP plan. So we're in the middle of doing a CDEP plan right now that's supposed to run us out to, I think, 2022, something like that. These 3 documents, of course, were reviewed and revised and updated and you'll notice that all over the district there are these purple documents that we kind of have posted all around to kind of anchor everyone's thinking about sort of this is what we're all about around here, kind of way of thinking about this sort of way of thinking. So I like to start with just anchoring in that concept, but I also like to go just a hair further with CDEP planning this time around, because the district now has 3 strategic goals that guide and direct CDEP activities and also embed the activities of the 3 schools. So anything that the 3 schools might be taking on in terms of curriculum development, in terms of professional development, program planning, and so on and so forth, they have to kind of map their activities back to one of these 3 goals to anchor their thinking. So you'll notice that there's an academics and achievement goal that really just states pretty obviously that the kids are going to demonstrate mastery of the skills and knowledge necessary at every level and content area to meet or exceed high school graduation requirements by 2022. The second goal is a school climate goal, which as you may know, has sort of been foregrounded as a goal that we really need to think about in the school district, and hence over the course of this particular school district we have actually done a lot of things in relation to this goal, and I'll talk about that a little bit later. But the idea here is to develop a school climate and culture that provides a positive and safe collaborative learning community that will keep students and staff engaged and connected in meaningful ways to support a healthy social and emotional development of all the students. And then, of course, we have a professional development and collaboration goal, which really talks about the importance of faculty, staff, administration, and the larger community, obviously, working together to meet the aspirations of the district's mission, vision, and core values. You'll see that these 3 things are intentionally sort of inextricably linked to one another. That is, you need all 3 of these to be successful in any one of these particular areas to keep you focused. So the mission, vision, core values grounds us. These strategic goals kind of guide what we are shooting for. But maybe more importantly is there's a theory of action embedded in this strategic plan that I keep trying to remind everyone of every chance I get. And maybe it's just because it's a pet thought process that I have in my own head and I can't really get it out of my head. But the way this thing is set up, and we keep reinforcing this with the teachers, we reinforce it with the principals and so on, is that there's those 3 theory of action long-term goals, and that's really what they are. They're saying, well, if we do these things, we will get to where we want to be. And the idea here is that there are 2 assumptions that are just huge in this process, and that is that all of Rhinebeck's K-12 students, personnel, instructional programs, and pupil personnel services will be engaged in achieving the aims, purposes defined within the district's Board of Education adopted mission, vision, core values. What that's saying is everybody's got skin in the game. Nobody gets to say, hey, well, that's your job. We all own this thing together. And therefore, if we're going to achieve it, that shared ownership of this process is really important. So we set out to engage all of the professional faculty, non-instructional personnel, and so on in the goal-setting process when we did the CDEP plan. And then we need to set up a set of ongoing mechanisms to monitor the progress of each student and refine and develop it as we go along. That is, we know where we want to go, we know that everybody's supposed to be engaged in this thing, but as we go along, we're going to have to develop metrics to sort of say, hey, are we going where we're going? So part of what I'm doing tonight is to talk about where are we in relation to that long-term goal. Joe, do you want me to move that closer to me? Would it be better for you? How do you think about bringing that thing over here with me? Do you want to do that?
I think
It'll get me from there.
between there and there, it should
Okay.
be okay. Yeah.
Okay, so just to, I mean, I know it may seem like an arcane point, but the idea behind collecting student achievement data and reporting it out is not to just talk about a bunch of numbers on a sheet, but to try and use them as ways of seeing holistically, are we going in the direction we want to go? And if not, what kind of changes can we make? What kind of refinements can we make in the plan so that we know we're moving where we're supposed to go? So that's the idea. So the basic theory of action looks like that. There's a mission, vision, core value statement. We have academics and achievements, school climate, professional development, and then there are objectives in the plan underneath each one of those goal areas, and each of those objectives come out of the 3 schools. So the plan itself has goals from every one of the 3 schools tied to every one of these things. So it sort of anchors everybody's thinking. So, when I'm talking about educational assessment, I always have to kind of preface it because I feel like, quite frankly, there's a lot of loopy stuff getting said about tests out there in this world these days because of the way tests are used in schools. So forgive me for just a few minutes and do a bird walk about what testing is for and what it's not for and how it's best used. So assessment, is really an evidentiary argument. You're collecting information to create a fact pattern that would allow you to have some evidence to start making some inferences about what's going on with a kid, what's going on with a program, what's going on with some human activity. Is it doing what it is you want it to do, yes or no, and so on. So it is an evidentiary argument. And assessment involves sort of reasoning about a handful of things, and I want to emphasize a handful, because anytime we're testing kids, we're out of the entire universe of possible questions you're asking, you're picking a subset of questions and asking those questions, and then from those few questions, you're trying to infer a larger set of assumptions about what's going on. So just think about how complicated that is if you try to really assess what's happening with kids. So, and then you're trying to cast valid and reliable inferences. So that's really what testing is about, is can I make valid and reliable inferences from these results? Well, it turns out you can make some valid and reliable inferences from tests, and others are not so valid and not so reliable. So we'll talk a little more about that as I proceed on. So why do we do it in the first place? Well, we need to conduct program evaluations, that's a fact. So we need to do things like look at how individuals, programs, instruction, identified groups of one sort or another are doing, and we do that by using two different kinds of tests. We use summative assessment, and then we use formative assessment. Summative, as you might imagine, that's assessment that kind of happens at the end of a string of activities of one sort or another. So simplest way to think about summative assessment, Regents exams, SATs, AP scores, things like that. Those are things that happen at the end of a long course of instruction. Summative could be thought about in a shorter duration, end of course assessment, grade 3 through 8 assessment on math and English language arts or social studies or science, whatever it might be. That could be a summative, and then a formative, but then it could also be leading to a larger summative thing. So you should think about the 3 through 8 testing scheme in the state of New York as sort of a combination of summative and formative, in that it's formative, in that it kind of gives us a broad picture of how everybody's doing. But you'll notice with kids, they develop asymmetrically. That is, they're not in the 8th grade school, we like to call it. They don't, everybody develops the same at 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. And in fact, there's a pretty broad spectrum of development. And so it wouldn't be surprising to see kids do variably on assessments as they go through when they assess grade level standards or standards that exceed their grade level. So we kind of try to look at both of those, and then, like I said, we try to cast some valid and reliable inferences from that information. And then individual student information is important because we need to figure out what kind of goals to set so that we can maybe change what we're doing. That kind of gets back to the CDEP idea that I was talking about. So let's just sort of breeze through a few things. Basically, I don't think you need to be I don't think you have to be Nostradamus to know that we have declining enrollment, and so from 12-13 at 11-20 to the present, somewhere around 1034 are in the school district now. So we are in a sort of downward decline in terms of overall enrollment. You can see that in our 3 through 8 ELA assessments, if you look here at the very end over there, 16-17, you'll see grade 3 through 8, top to bottom. 60% of the kids scored a level 3 or above, or in just common language, passed the test according to the standard that was set by the state. A quick word about that. The way the tests are set up is they score the kids according to their raw scores, then they take the raw scores, in other words, how many they got right out of how many questions they answered, and then they put those into what's called a scaled score. Then they go from the scaled score to what they call proficiency cut points. So then those cut points are cut in the state of New York according to either one of two different methods. One is they're cut into 4, that is level 1, 2, 3, 4, or in some other examples there are assessments that are cut into 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5. and those cuts tend to be set up as cut points in the scaled scores that they get from the raw scores. So this gets to this sort of tricky business about inferring from numbers, because they've gone from raw scores to scale scores to cut points for proficiency. And so you have to realize that you're inferring from something that's gone through mathematical calculations at least 3 times. So just for the sake of this discussion, so 60% of the kids scored level 3 or above, which is what the state would say is the benchmark for proficiency for a grade level. Okay? So, and so 60, 59, 47, 39, 52, 61 is what those numbers are. The math proficiency is 3 through 8 accordingly, 68, 46, 59, 65, 43, 23%. So now we'll back up just 1 second here. So I'm going to make this a little more complicated. I apologize for that, but I'm sure you know that in the state of New York we have this phenomenon of test refusals. So a certain percentage of the parents of our students allow their students to not take these tests. So we are only talking about the kids who did take the test, not the kids who did not take the test. That seems obvious, but if you think about it, it's important, because it depends on who did or did not take the test, whether or not scores will be either one place or another, depending upon what happens to those kids. So I'll show you in 1 second when I talk about math as an example of what I'm talking about. So you'll notice that grade 8 last year in 16-17, only 23% of the kids who took that test scored at the benchmark of proficiency. Okay, so hold on to that idea. You'll notice too that the pattern continues with special education kids finding grade level material very challenging, and that's another complexity in the test package for the state of New York. They have special education students taking the same tests, and they're held to the same proficiency standard as a general education student is. And so some percentage of the kids who don't, quote unquote, pass these tests are special education students. Now, here's the thing about a student who is eligible for an IEP under most circumstances as a special ed student. Those kids are tested with a full battery of tests to determine their eligibility for the classification under special ed, and almost in every single case they test far below grade level average. So it would not be surprising that those kids would take these tests and not do well on them. As a matter of fact, we'd be shocked if they did do well on them, because the special education testing is indicating that they can't meet grade level standards. So in this case here, you can see that a small percentage of the kids who are classified special education, in fact, meet these grade level standards. So you can just see, if you look across the top inside the red square there, you can see the comparisons of the all student population across the board. So just to give you a general sense, general education kids in grade 3, 69% of those kids passed the test. The 8 students with disabilities who took that same test, none of them passed that test. So it gives you an idea of what I'm talking about. It's just an example. And that pattern holds and has held for quite some time. We're also noticing in the data over time, because we are seeing an increase in our economically disadvantaged student population over the years. It's kind of leveled out now, but it's significantly higher than it used to be. And those kids also seem to disproportionately find grade level standards difficult to achieve as compared to their general education age mates. So that's a pretty consistent pattern. So you can see that what I just said sort of holds true across math and English language arts. Now, you'll notice that, moving back to that grade 8 thing that I was just talking about, grade 8 students in the state of New York, if they're accelerated, can take the Algebra 1 Regents exam because they've taken Algebra 1 in grade 8. So you'll notice that all the kids who took that test last year, there were 20 of them, scored at the level 4 level or above. In other words, they scored in the highest level. So those kids weren't counted in the other group. So not only you didn't have kids who were test refusals in that group, you also had special education kids in that group, and we also took out all the kids who were accelerated from that group. So that explains why that thing's so low, because these kids aren't in that group. All that was left were the students who struggled to meet grade level standards in that list, so it's not surprising that that number is extremely low. So anyway, it's a long-winded way of explaining that, but you can see those kids, all of them passed the first time through at the highest level. Science proficiency, kids take a science test in the state of New York that is administered at grade 4 and grade 8. You'll see that last year, about 98% of the kids passed that test. And then in grade 8, about 87%. The year before that was 96. Typically, the pass rates in this particular exam run somewhere around 90%, just below. It's a pretty common outcome on that test. So you can see the trend analysis for grade 4 tends to run pretty high across all the years, all the way back to 06, 07, all the way to the present. So for 10 years, it's kind of tracked along that same place. And you can see for 10 years, the grade 8 science is kind of tracked along the same way. About the same kind of scores. It varies from year to year. So the kind of basic down and dirty thing that I do, which is just for my own sort of understanding things a little clearer, is in 16, 17, you had those pass rates on those scores, and then I just do a gap between 100%, and then I sort of take a look at it so I can kind of see across the board how that particular cohort did, and are there things that we should pay attention to. So just a quick word about what we do when we get this information back. We develop a rather complex portfolio of evaluations of how the kids do on these tests. Everything from item analysis, mapping to the standards that each of the items ask for, by grade level, by student. We have individual reports on every kid, and all that stuff gets fed back to the teachers, and the teachers are asked to review that information, make recommendations for curricular adjustments, professional development, and things like that. So the principals work with the teachers in order to put those things together to help us continue to improve. One of the big challenges in the state of New York over these last several years, there's really two big challenges. One is the state has changed the standards again, and then before that they also changed the test package. So they tend to change things a lot, and so a lot of what we do is end up doing a lot of adjusting to what the state education department would decide to do one way or another. We've just entered a new set of standards, and those new standards are just now starting to be used to guide the new assessments. Most of you know, or may not know, New York State is currently in what's called a test moratorium with regard to 3 through 8 testing. And what that means is you're not allowed to use those tests for evaluation purposes of students. In other words, you can't hold the kid back, you can't use it for educational planning purposes. You can't even put the results of the scores on their cume folders. As a matter of fact, that's how serious they are. And in addition to that, I know you know that we have an APPR plan that uses student achievement data. Well, during this moratorium, you're not allowed to use this test data for that purpose. We just report it to the state, but we're not allowed to use it in any kind of meaningful way to evaluate the teachers. Because why? Because the test package itself has been found to be suspect and needs to be updated and reviewed and revised, and the state is undergoing that process right now. They're going through the process to put a new set of tests out on the field here soon enough, hopefully. We keep hearing that they're going to do that. So now we'll move up to the high school. You'll notice that the list of exams that we give at the high school, Common Core Algebra 1, Algebra 2, Geometry, Chem, Earth. We used to give an ELA English Comp. We don't give that anymore. Common Core ELA is the test we now give. We used to give a straight geometry test. We don't do that anymore. Then we do global. We used to do integrated algebra. We don't do that anymore. Living environment, physics, and US. So if you look to the far right, you'll see that the first time through, the Common Core Algebra, Algebra 2, and Geometry, respectively, 98, 98, 93. You'll see Chem, Earth Science, 77, 84, Common Core ELA, 93, Global History, 83, Living Environment, 97, Physics, 85, US History, 93. So now I just want you to kind of go back up and look at those 3 maths and think about 3 through 8. All the kids that took those exams were kids that came through our 3 through 8 program. So if you go back and map, you'll see that those cohorts of kids were kind of all over the place in terms of the 3 through 8 testing. But by the time they get to these summative exams, they go through a high school course that prepares them for a test that's a summative exam of Algebra 1, Algebra 2, and Geometry, you'll see that they tend to do quite well. The same thing is true of the Common Core ELA. If you look at the 2 years we've given that, 97 and 93. So, first time through, the pass rates are very favorable for those. Some areas that jumped out at me when I looked at that last year, chemistry, global history jumped out at me, and physics kind of jumped out at me as, I'm not really sure what's going on with that, and then earth science. So again, same procedure is done every year. I develop a rather comprehensive portfolio of evaluations of the tests. That information is sent back to the principals and filtered back out to the teachers. The teachers are asked every year, take a look at that, take a look at the results, see what items the kids did okay on, which ones they didn't, figure out if there's a profile of those kids, and then adjust instruction accordingly. So they did that, so we'll kind of see how they do this year. But that's kind of how the model works in order to keep things going in a good direction. So you can see that ELA and math, if you just look at the purple line, that's algebra. If you look at the ELA line that's red, you can see that they're both tracking above 90%, as we would expect them to. And again, it's just worth pausing and noting again that those kids were all over the place between 3 through 8 as they were taking math and ELA exams. So SATs are worth talking about. Again, it may be worth just kind of lingering back one last time and saying that, no one of these things kind of disposes of the matter and says, oh, you're great, or oh, you're not so good, or wow, that's really bad. It's more, you have to look at these things like a holistic constellation of factors and then make some judgments. Like I said, make some inferences that are reliable and valid. So again, this is another indicator, I'll call it. So in 17, you'll see that the national was 1070, and if you look at Rhinebeck, it was 1203. If you look at the New York State, it was 1057, and it was math 592 and 610 respectively for Rhinebeck. Now, I don't know if this matters, but it's worth saying out loud. The SAT scores, you have to watch how they're reported, because they're given kind of on a rolling basis to kids in their junior year for the most part, but some kids take it over again, some of them take it in October, some of them take it in the early spring, and some of them take it in the late spring, and some of them retake it, and they don't always take it on our site, they take it elsewhere. So this data is kind of beehive data until it all distills into one pot at the College Board and gets back to us. And so you'll notice that there are different numbers tied to SAT scores in school districts and so on and so forth out there in newspapers and all this kind of stuff. So you just should notice that. But the reason for that is like I just told you. It's as simple as that. I try to wait long enough that it distills down to the final result and gets it to me. And usually I'm pretty close. So you can see that that's where we are. So it would be very unusual for our kids to not far exceed the New York State averages and the national averages, and in fact, our students tend to compare very favorably to other SAT takers in the state of New York, and such that we are in a pretty top tier district, and I'll talk about that in a few minutes. Another indicator of success of our academic programs is last year we gave 199 AP exams across 10 courses. You can see the 10 courses across the top. You can see that, of course, this thing is also raw score, scale score, cut point done. So they cut the APs according to level 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And you can see that on the far end in the grand total column between the two blue arrows, about 34 kids got level 5s, 74 got 4s, and so on and so forth. And you can see out of 199 exams. You'll notice that we did get some kids who scored level 2 and level 1. It's sort of a peculiarity of Rhinebeck that we have kids who, we kind of encourage kids to challenge themselves into difficult classes, and so we're not really that concerned about kids not scoring well on these exams. Not that we don't want them to take the challenge, but we would rather see a kid push themselves into a more difficult class if they can, if they're willing to, accept the challenge, And we'll live with the fact that maybe they only get a 2 or a 1 on the exam, because we feel like that getting that sort of college course experience in high school is a really important developmental experience for them. But even so, with that philosophy, our levels of 3, 4s, and 5s remains very respectable. So the high school graduation rate in Rhinebeck, that chart looks a little funny because it kind of jumps around, but you can see that it runs about 91%, 93%, 92%. Back in 13-14, it was a particularly difficult cohort of kids that really struggled. That was at 86%. But I can tell you, generally speaking, it's been running above 90% or right around 90% for years. The 2- and 4-year postgraduate college plans, the 2- and 4-year attendance rate, if you will, tends to be about 95%. So generally speaking, you could just say as a general statement about our program, kids 90% chance of graduating from high school or better, and about 95% of those kids go on to 2- and 4-year colleges. So some other data that we collected this year, pursuant to the goal in the CEDAP plan, we administered in the fall a school climate survey to the students, the parents, and the teachers and persons who worked for the organization. And the assessment we used is the comprehensive school inventory that's put out by the National School Climate Center. It has its evaluation tool measures these 13 different dimensions. So it measures things like rules and norms, physical security, social emotional security, support for learning, social and civic learning, respect for diversity, school support for adults, school support students, school connectedness and engagement, social media, physical surroundings, leadership, and professional relationships. And those constructs are kind of described in that column to the right. And then what happens is they create a survey that has a bunch of questions geared to get perspectival data on how a student or a teacher or a parent might see that particular dimension in the school that you either attend, work in, or you're the parent of a student who attends that. So these are across the bottom, those dimensions that I'm talking about. There is what they call a factor median, which is just a median score out of 5. It's a Likert scale, 1 being the lowest, 5 being the highest. And then they take a mean of that score, or a median rather. And so you can kind of see that there were 3 big areas that jumped out as we were doing the analysis of this and rolling this data out. Oh, by the way, on a superintendent's conference day in the fall, we had someone up from the National School Climate Center. They made presentations to the professional faculty, administration, and so on and so forth. And in addition to that, the CDEP team had us put together a team called the School Climate Vertical Team, and that team's been meeting all year to look at this data, have conversations with the people down at the National School Climate Center, and has been making plans to use this data for professional development activities in the fall. So we have 2 superintendent's conference days coming up in the fall. We're going to use this information and kind of put that into what those days look like so people can start to make some program changes to address these issues. And particularly, we're going to be looking at a sense of social emotional security, because that was relatively rated low across all 3 populations, that is faculty, parents, and students. Social and civic learning was rated relatively low, and social media. Probably wouldn't find that surprising. No one who analyzed this data did find that surprising. But it was important to take a look at it. If you look at it by school, so Buckley Middle School, Chancellor, and Rhinebeck, Buckley is the orange one, Chancellor is the sort of aquamarine blue one, and then there's the purple one. So you can see, guess what they rated as relatively low as well. Well, sense of social emotional security, social and civic learning, and social media. So even though the scores kind of fell into the middle range, those 3 areas really jumped out at us as areas that we're going to be taking a look at over the next couple of superintendent's conference days, and then we're going to put together some plans to try to address that when then we intend on re-administering this survey next year to see where everybody's at again on the same issue, use that data to continue to plan. So we're not just using student achievement data to evaluate the academic programs, which we continue to do, but we're also layering this into the process. So, what's to say? Well, Rhinebeck, this big picture, this is sort of Marvin's big inferences. This is what I think. People can think what they want, but this is how I see it. So Rhinebeck was named as one of the nation's best high schools, U.S. News and World Report. It was ranked about 1423 out of 20,000 schools. In New York State, we were ranked 130 out of 287 that made that list. We're named as one of the most challenging high schools by the Washington Post. The 2017 SAT scores for New York high schools, Rhinebeck was ranked number 19, placing it in the top 50 statewide. Our four-year cohort graduation rate was 91. Our college attendance rate was 95. AP participation, like I said, 10 courses, 112 kids, 199 AP exams, which kind of contributes to how we end up on those lists that I'm talking about, because that's one of the measures that gets you on those lists. So as far as accountability goes in the state of New York, Rhinebeck High School is a reward high school, has been for 5 consecutive years due to 2 factors: student achievement, graduation rate combined, and then also gap closing. And what that means is that subpopulations do just as well as the general population, so there's not a big gap between how those kids do. And if you think about the breadth of change as kids go through 3 through 8, and then when they get up in the high school, that's a real challenge to try to pull that off. So what we believe, and I think it's fair to at least infer, is that the developmental approach that we take to 3 through 8 and the real, hopefully personalized approach that we try to take with every kid, that is, we don't let kids fall through the cracks if we can help it. We end up with a pretty successful summative picture of how the district looks at the high school level, while we maintain a pretty good standing at Buckley Middle School and Chester Livingston Elementary School, as both schools are in good standing in the state of New York. So, what are the positive trends to talk about? Well, I kind of highlighted them, but let's just tick through them. You know, the elementary science results are still very respectable at 98. Elementary and middle school mathematics is still doing okay, but it is improving. The middle school ELA continues to improve. Actually, we got some of our best scores at a couple of grade levels this last year. So we feel like that there has been progress at that level. If you look at the 16-17 data on the far end inside the red box, you'll see that the Algebra 1, Geometry, and Algebra 2 scores are all in the high 90s. If you look at English Regents, it was at 93. We tend to do relatively well still with Global American Living Environment. AP participation, as I said, 112 kids took 199 exams. We have a high participation rate in our extracurricular program and athletics. Four-year cohort rate is about 91%, and our 2 and 4 year attendance rate is about 95%. So lots to celebrate, but I think mainly we kind of forget and probably should talk about, at least briefly when we talk about student achievement, is that, you know, this is all work done by kids, so they are to be commended for the hard work and, you know, buying into the idea that student achievement really matters, and that accepting the challenge of academic press is something that they do. So they've earned those achievements. We are in the support business, if you will, and the human potential business, but they're the ones who have to kind of achieve their potential, and of course we're very proud of them. Our SAT scores are favorable. We have a broad array of arts athletics for a small school district. We continue to use school climate survey. We've implemented Project Lead the Way, which is a STEM program across the 3 schools. We now have it fully implemented in the elementary school in the form of what we call Project Launch. We have Gateway to Technology in the middle school, and then we have Principles of Engineering, Intro to Engineering and Design, and we brought on this year a Project Lead the Way AP Computer Science course. So we feel really proud of that STEM program, and it's something to really say we can celebrate that. Of course, Rhinebeck High School is a reward high school. It's on the challenge list for the Washington Post. Both other schools are in good standing. So, what's to do as we go forward? Well, I think how we grow is we continue to look at all disciplines and use multiple measures as we have been, keep feeding that information back into the system to shape how people take action, whether it's professional development, curriculum development, teaming, or whatever it might be. So support and strengthening teaching is a really important part of this project. Supporting effective leadership is critical. Creating positive and healthy and safe school climate is critical. A quick word about that. We are noticing an uptick in data and information that tells us that, and it's hard to get our head around what the data might say about that, but we're hearing anecdotally and also in experiences with kids that kids with anxiety disorders, school phobia, and so on and so forth are coming to our attention more and more. And so we're concerned about that. So hence kind of thinking, well, school climate and culture really maybe needs to be something that we foreground so that we can support these kids, because we've been spending quite a bit of the last 10 years or so creating a lot of academic press. And so now we're kind of concerned about that. So I think this idea of creating a positive and healthy, safe school climate is a really important thing. And to celebrate and recognize and acknowledge the successes of everyone as we move forward will continue to be an important part of what we do. I think that we have to create what I call high trust, high expectation, that is high support and collaboration organizations. That's how you build strong organizations that are successful over time. It's what the research tells you. And so I think we need high trust and high expectations at the same time. I think with the aspirational goal of 2022 is an important one, and I think we need to stay focused on it. Dr. Jager made it very clear to the CDEP team, and I think it holds to this moment, that if you're going to do this kind of planning, shooting for a moonshot is what you should try to do. So trying to get all kids in the mix, find a pathway for all of them to be successful by 2022 is important, and that means that work has to continue apace between now and then. We can't just wait to see how we're doing. We got to keep measuring, we got to keep looking at what we're doing and keep improving it year on year. I think we have to continue the support pieces that in between for special education students and for students who are struggling to meet grade level standards through our Title I programs and so on and so forth. I think it's critical that we do that. I think the fruit of those programs is born as these kids stay with us, and I think if you see in the high school, it kind of bears out that generalization, so I think it's fair to say that. I think curriculum development will always be something we do for two reasons. One, that work is never done. Horizontal and vertical alignment is important. I think we have to have consistency and transparency in practice, and I think we have to support and insist on differentiation and developmentally appropriate challenge for all students, no matter where they fall in the continuum, whether they're a kid who's not quite ready for grade level, whether they're ready for grade level, or whether they're already there, and we need to extend the work. Part of the challenge of being a teacher is meeting that challenge. So we put an emphasis on that. We will continue to try to do so and get better at that. We could always grow in that area. I think we have to look at all the new standards which have just come out, and we're in various stages of rolling those into the program. ELA, Math, Science, Social Studies, Arts, and Technology are out. We spent a lot of time on ELA over the course of the last several years. We are now kind of shifting our attention to Math, Science, and Social Studies, and I think you'll see activities around those areas coming into the next school year as we start to turn our attention to those, but also the arts standards that have just come out. We've asked our folks in the arts area to start taking a look at them and give us some recommendations on implementing them. And then, of course, I think professional development is key along the way for all of us to get better at what we do. K-12 technology curriculum is important. We have to keep focused on integrating that into the core program. We have to align well and tightly instruction as well. We need to reinforce the importance of professional learning and collaboration, and we need to focus heavily, continuing, I think, on this school climate initiative in order to keep measuring the overall quality of school climate and culture and raising it. I think we've run into a moment in our culture where there is a strong recognition that there are certain persons in our society that have been disadvantaged as a result of structures and cultural norms, and I think we have to change practice and we have to raise awareness in relation to those things. And so we are seeing a lot of attention paid to issues around Title IX compliance, for example, and sexual harassment and things like that. And I think those are, don't take this the wrong way, but I think it's a good thing that those things are being surfaced, and I think it's also a good thing that we're paying attention to them in a proactive way. And I think measuring school climate and taking those things seriously is an important step in addressing that issue. So, just quickly, and just because I feel like I have to tell you how I'm being tortured by the State Education Department, so I think you should join me. The State Education Department in the great state of New York is changing everything that's got to do with the entire structure of accountability in the state of New York. We have been under these many years under something that was called the No Child Left Behind Act. We then went into something temporarily under the Obama administration called Race to the Top. In the last year of the Obama administration, the Congress and the President were able to sign into law a law called Every Student Succeeds Act. Now we do ESSA. So ESSA is going to measure schools according to student achievement, student growth, academic progress, graduation rates, English language proficiency, chronic absenteeism, college and career and civic readiness, and in ensuing years, they're going to bring online additional nice colorful boxes such as out-of-school suspension, school climate, and so on and so forth. So we will be collecting data on all of those different dimensions and reporting it to the State Education Department, and then you'll be seeing a revised version of that school report card that you have there. More to come on that. Your eyes will glaze over and you'll wish that I would stop talking if I start explaining how they're going to go about doing that. We'll get to that in the ensuing years, but I think it is important for you to know that next year you'll be hearing all about this, and it'll become a critical part of how we do business going forward. Okay? And that's me. So there we go.
Marvin, just to jump back to the 3 to 8 testing.
Yeah.
So we have a considerable percentage of students, significant percentage of students that don't take the tests. So how useful is that data again? Are we able to use it for practical purposes? And I understand in other school districts the percentage of students that don't take the tests is larger, but still, we have a significant number that don't take the tests.
Yeah. Well, so the answer is it makes it very difficult to generalize about a whole population. You've got to go in and look at each one of those individual records to determine whether or not the student finished the test, because we have test fatigue issues. So the kids do really well on the first day, so-so on the second day. We used to do 3 days of testing, now they reduced it to 2. But you'll see this sort of test fatigue thing, so they start doing worse and worse because they get tired. Versus you've got the reverse, because they changed the format so they allow the kids to take as much time as they want. So we had kids who spent the entire day taking the test. They didn't stop taking it until 2:30, 3 o'clock in the afternoon. So that's the spread. So you have to go in and look at each and every record before you can make generalizations, which is why I said all that stuff about inferences and all that. You have to watch what's in there. Because even the kids who did take the test might have done okay on a section of it, but not so okay on another section of it because they just ran out of gas, they just got tired. These tests are hard. They're set up to challenge kids. There are items on the test from grade levels above the grade level that they're in, because they want to make a test that has what they like to call stretch, which means it catches a kid who maybe performs above grade level, but any kid who performs at grade level or below is going to miss that question, so that's going to show up in the results too. So that's why you have to watch that. And that problem there is compounded by 2, you don't know who took it and who didn't. I'm talking about by the level. You can kind of do some historical research and say, well, maybe that student would have got a 3, would have got a 4, but they didn't take it, so what use is it to you? So you have to watch spending too much time on things that aren't going to produce a lot of results. So we ask the teachers and the principals to use multiple measures to monitor how the kids are doing, to give us a sense of how they're making their way through. So that's how we respond to that.
A question about, you're talking about the uptick in students with anxiety. Is that mainly in the high school, or are we seeing that in the middle school and even the elementary school?
I think it progresses as kids get older. You get more and more and more of that. It seems like there's a lot of reasons for that. Some of it's social media and living life through phones and that whole thing. Some of it's some other issues that we're noticing. But yeah, I think as kids get older. But I will say, the troubling thing about that is we're seeing it younger and younger. So that's another part of it that's troubling.
So, Marvin, we always get this great report and we see it year on year. I'm wondering if you spend any significant amount of time watching particular cohorts of kids from year to year. And do you try to assess whether, because ultimately when they get in the high school, the numbers look fantastic, but they seem to sort of struggle along the way based on these numbers, which, are difficult to really assess. But do you spend any time watching this cohort of kids? Are we providing the supports that they need? Are we challenging them? Are we meeting them where they are? Can you sort of divine from these numbers what's going on with, the way we're changing the structure of educating kids?
Yeah, I see what you mean. I would say we look at this as like a thumbnail. We say, wait, what's that? So then I'll send an email typically to a principal. I'll attach a slide deck or I'll attach a report and say, hey, I just went through this. What do you think? And we end up thinking, wow, this group, maybe they're struggling. Which population is struggling? And so maybe Emily Davison gets involved in the conversation. So it's more like that. And then it's, what are the support services in place? So, of course, as you know, we have a pretty robust array of different kinds of things for kids. We have special ed teachers, we've got reading specialists, we've got math specialists, we've got speech, we've got OT, we've got counseling through our school counselors. So some of it is now going one step further and saying, well, what are the needs for this kid? Is it social emotional, so they need to see Dr. Montagne in the elementary school? Or is it they can't crack the code, so they've got to go through some kind of more structured reading program, or it's mathematics. So it really kind of depends. But this data here, it's just thumbnail. I just kind of look at it and track along and say, wow, that was for that group, that's kind of, what is that? And then I'll send that information to them with a highlight. I send it to them anyway, because when I get it all back in and I get it assembled in a data package, I push it back out to them and then they send it out to their people. I think that's the best answer to how that works. Oh, yeah, fine.
I realized I wrote down several questions, and there's sort of a theme about participation in my questions. Does everyone take the regents? So by the time, we were looking at that summative data, which all looks really nice, is that everybody? Or are there some people who aren't in that?
There are few who do not.
Okay.
And the reason for that is you have to get 22 credits and you got to pass 5 Regents exams. And so initially those Regents exams are exams that pretty much every kid takes. Now, as kids self-select out, not every kid is going to show up on Algebra 2, right? Because they'll go out. Not every kid's going to show up on a physics. Not every kid's going to show up on a chem, and so on and so forth. So it kind of depends. But because of the course requirements locally and as well as the state, how many science do you have to have, how many math, and so on, we get a fair number of kids who show up on those tests. So not every, but most is the answer to that.
And did every student take the climate survey?
No. The participation rate was super good on the kids, though. I don't remember what it was. I didn't bring it with me, so I don't know. But the kids did pretty well because, they're a captive audience. So we take them into the lab and they tell us. They were our best participation rate, were the students.
Did you happen to do the exercise of adding back the Algebra 1 students in to the 8th grade, right, to see what the proficiency would be overall?
I didn't.
I was just curious.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. I'm
And
sure it would have been significantly higher.
it would have been significantly higher, yeah, but I was just
It's
curious.
a good question, though.
And this may be a question for other another venue or time, but what are we doing to address opt-outs? How do we discuss that with our parent population?
Well, that is
Do we have
that's a tough question, you know?
Do we
It
have
really
an
is.
approach?
Well, okay, so there's a long answer to that and a short answer to that. So maybe in another time and place, maybe at a curriculum meeting or something, whenever we could talk about this more thoroughly. But the bottom line is, in the great state of New York, you can have your kid refuse to take the test. And if you're sort of philosophically predisposed to say, hey, you guys overtest my kid. I don't need you to, he doesn't need to take that test. She doesn't need to take that test. And there's a little bit of a contagion effect of that. You know, my friends are not taking the test. Why do I have to take the test? So it's a parenting challenge, I think, in some cases. So I think there's a lot of factors around that. The big picture, though, is the state of New York gets, I believe, it is $1.8 billion a year from the federal government through Title I. And that money is contingent on compliance with the Every Student Succeeds Act. And so in that federal law, it is required that 95% of any testable population take these tests. If not, you are supposed to be held, quote unquote, accountable. So districts are, under the new ESSA requirements that we'll be talking about next year, are going to start to be held accountable for their refusals. And we are supposed to be thinking about developing a plan to engage with the community to get them more interested in taking the test. That's going to be a formidable challenge because the advocacy groups out there, well, I mean, I know most of the groups, I can tell you who they are out there pushing this hard to stay the course and stay with the test refusal plan because they don't feel like the state education department has quite got the message yet. And so they're really pushing hard on the state to change some things. And one of them is to change test requirements and using tests to evaluate faculty and administration. So I think until you see some change at the regent level, that's going to continue to be an issue. That's my 2 cents on that. Yeah, Joe, please.
Isn't it accurate that up to this point, there really haven't been any sanctions on schools for not reaching the 95%?
It's true.
And the recent, like within the last day or so of discussion at the Regents, the Board of Regents in Albany, I'm hearing anyway, that the consequence ultimately is going to be that if you don't have 95% or better taking these assessments, that they're going to require you to put together a plan using your Title I monies. So it potentially will be taking money away from providing services to kids who qualify for Title I. That's the carrot and the stick that they're talking about now up in Albany at the Regent State.
Yes. That little nugget of policy stirred up quite a controversy in Albany.
Yes.
When it came out live.
Yes.
You could imagine. Yeah, so to be continued on that. I mean, if nothing else, what happens is you get big red nose on your school report card because you didn't meet the participation rate of 95%. That's really been the extent of what's happened. It's sort of like a shaming you for not testing your kids.
My last question.
Oh, sure.
When did the moratorium start on not using the?
2 years ago. Yeah, it ends next year, I think. It's slated to end. Yeah, so this is, so we're 17, 18, 18, 19, 19, 20 is when it's supposed to end. So we're in one more year and then it ends after. And so they don't quite know what to do yet because they haven't got a plan yet. I was just in the presence of the commissioner 2 times in the last couple weeks, and both times she said, we're working on it. Well, stay tuned.
Okay.
So will this slide deck be posted on the website?
Indeed it will.
If not this slide deck, the data?
Nope, the whole thing. We put it up,
Posted every
usually right after this, we take whatever I hand it to you and it goes right up off the website, off the my link there.
So we've been talking a lot about social and emotional health of our students. That's been everywhere. We've heard a lot more about their stresses and anxiety. That's, and I'm wondering, a couple years ago, maybe 2 years ago now, one of our faculty said something to a group of us that has kind of stuck with me, and it keeps resurfacing. And I'm just wondering your thoughts on it. And I'm wondering if any of it seems to be tied to the academic pressure that our kids are in, especially in the high school. And specifically APs, what this teacher had said was, a lot of our kids are taking 3 and 4 APs. And when you look at that, that is a full schedule in college. But our kids are doing that in addition to 5 or 6 other classes. That's really not natural. Maybe it's too much. Maybe not. And I'm just wondering your thoughts on that, or if you've come across any studies or anything that speaks to that.
Yeah. Well, I'm reading a lot in this area right now, just because it's kind of a front burner issue in the district. And one of the things that you see in the literature is that it's kind of variable. But one variable that seems to be important is that challenge is a good thing. That tension that gets created to really push yourself. Too much challenge is a bad thing. And taking on challenges without having the requisite skills to meet them is also a bad thing. And so, which is it? Are you helping kids develop the resiliency and the skill to take on that next challenge well enough so that they can meet that challenge, whatever that may be, if they choose to in the council with their parents? And that's a hard question to answer. I don't know. The other factor that seems to be kind of barreling in on this is the social media realities of kids' lives. I'm hearing more and more that that's affecting their attention level. There's actually some really interesting studies out there on divided attention because of phones, and the phone doesn't even have to be in their pocket. It can be in the room that they're in, and they sort of are anxious, and so their minds are kind of bounced back and forth. So it's a complex brew of things. It's over-challenge and not being ready, it's the mind is kind of seems to be somewhat unfocused, and maybe as a society. And this is a broad philosophical question, so I think this is where you get into some controversy depending upon which side of this you come down on. But we have put a lot of pressure on public education to do everything from maintain our assessments on our homes, to economic viability of the country itself, to making us globally competitive in the economic realm. They create league tables that can compare all the OECD nations and see how our kids are comparing to everybody else in the world. And so, collectively as a society, we place a lot of our hopes and dreams for not only how we are locally, but what goes on with our entire country on how they do. And a lot of this comes down to the, what I call I call this the germ, the global economic reform movement. Because it's all about seeing how everybody's doing on tests. And so another part of that, I think, is restoring a love for learning for its own sake, not learning for purposes of performance on a test. And so I think that's the way out, personally, and it's just me. Maybe I'm an old sort of liberal progressive education thinker, but that's how I see it. So it's not so much the challenge itself, it's the type of challenge, it's the purpose of the challenge, it's the lack of support as they hit that challenge, and then it's the maybe attending to the social emotional development of making good choices, about how we use these things and what they mean to us and so on. So I don't know. That's my dose and dose. Sorry.
No, it wasn't a small question.
Yeah, it was kind of one of those big hairy questions.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, thank you for your attention. I appreciate it.
Thank you.
Can I ask a question as a public comment, or am I out of sequence?
Mark?
Would the board like to allow the question?
Sure.
Frank, you're up.
Okay, thanks. I'm Frank Selby, by the way.
Hi, Mr. Selby, how are you?
Good, how about yourself? This was phenomenal.
I'm good.
This was great stuff. I'm looking forward to seeing it on the website because I went and looked earlier today and there was this goofball PDF file that was not very readable, so this is great.
Okay, it'll be on. I'll put it tomorrow morning, first thing I get.
Okay. A couple of questions that come to mind.
Sure.
One of the things in here is the measure of success is proficiency. Is that the right measure? Should we have another measure that's excellence? Because what we're saying is, and it's great, I mean, that's wonderful to look up there and see that 90% or whatever the number is of the kids who take this region or that region or this exam or that exam are proficient. Is there another measure of excellence that we ought to be building into our thinking that exceeds proficiency, right? Whatever that metric is. And part of what strikes me with that is the one thing, the goal of 100% proficiency by 2022 or whatever the year was that you put it out there. It's obviously a great goal. I'm curious what the benchmarks are. If I sort of ask the question of the goal a different way and say, rough numbers based on some of the stuff you put up there, we're 80th percentile or whatever in the state, 82nd percentile, whatever it was. Okay, if we wanted to be 90th percentile, what does it take to get from here to there?
Yeah.
If that was a different way of looking at it, rather than just turning around and saying we want to be 100% in everything, and it might matter, and this is where kind of my big question, two big questions. My first one is, to me, and this is kind of what I've been saying all along, which is why I'm thrilled to see this data, because it's great stuff. How do we better bridge this to the budgeting process? And how do we use this to set the priorities that drive the budgeting process? Because at least as an outsider, as I sit in these budgeting meetings, they seem like two separate animals. And I'm sure there's a lot of behind-the-scenes discussion that's doing this, but in a world of constrained resources, which we certainly live in for budgeting, right? How do we make sure this drives the priorities of where the money goes, right? And make sure we keep that in alignment, right? And that's kind of been the big point I've been trying to make in these meetings, is whether it's the long-range planning or the budgeting process, some of the pages you just put up ought to be the beginning of every discussion. And then that ought to drive forward to this is how we allocate the money. If we had infinite resources, we would do everything. We don't, right? My other just thought question, kind of a mental exercise question, and this comes back to the sort of proficiency versus excellence discussion. Give or take, whatever the exact numbers are. 3 through 7 or 3 through 8, we're 60% proficient, right? Plus or minus a few percent, depending on which test or whatever it is, and it moves around by year. And then by the regions, we're 80 or 90% proficient. If we were to make whatever changes it takes, I don't know what they are, so that at 3 through 8, we were 80% proficient, what would that allow us to do to fundamentally change what we can deliver to students in 9 through 12? Because I think it changes. My kids are now in 6th grade. What I'm seeing, observing as a parent, is there's a bit of catching up for some places where they were not proficient in 3, 4, and 5, right? I mean, the intensity level has ratcheted up dramatically, right? Which is fine. I mean, I understand that. If they were somehow in a position coming out of 5th grade where they were more proficient, what could the teachers in 6th grade be doing now that propelled them farther forward instead of just getting them to catch up? So I don't know, just a different way of thinking about the same data. So anyway, that's my 2 cents. Thank you.
Sure.
Did you want a response to that question from Mr. Krebs?
Do you want me to respond?
I would love one if you have one. These are just mental questions I'm thinking about,
Okay.
or not, I don't know.
Okay.
Maybe you want to sit on it and
No.
the conversation can be another day.
Yeah, I might like to let that wash over me a little bit at some point and think about it more, but I have 2 reactions. One is, the comprehensive district education planning process itself is designed to respond to the core issue that you just talked about, which is the issue of continuous improvement and improving the overall quality of the program, and by focusing on the right things at the right time through root cause analysis. So what we did as we were developing the strategic plan that is currently in place was to say we're going to develop these metrics as we go along. So next school year, the CDEP team itself will be meeting, and they will be having, just forecasting anybody who ends up on that team, we're going to need to start focusing on those kinds of questions and asking questions of quality. But I think there's a more global question about the aims and purposes of a sequence of instruction, and then the methods and materials that you put in place to achieve those goals. So some of that is asking the broader question of just what are we trying to accomplish here? And then the interim benchmarks fall in line with the longer term aims and purposes. And so that's another function of the CDEP process. So we need to do that. That's what that process is for. So second part of that is, historically, the budget process in this school district and to some degree the personnel processes have run parallel to the CDEP process. It has become increasingly clear through issues that relate to declining enrollment, tighter budgets due to the tax cap, and so on and so forth, that we need to start having these 2 processes maybe not totally running on the same track, but tightly connected to each other. So over the course of the next few instructional cycles, we're going to have conversations about that. The gentleman that helped facilitate the comprehensive district education plan with us, we've asked him to come back and help us work with that process through the long-range planning, and there is conversation afoot to how that might play out and what that might look like and sound like. So you can see those 2 things kind of go, my answer kind of goes together in both cases. That's how I would respond. So I don't want to chew up too much of these guys' time. You guys are used to staying up all night.
Not tonight, Mark.
Not tonight. Oh, wait a minute, not tonight. Anyway, but I'm glad to talk more. Matter of fact, I'm not hard to find. I'm over at Chancellor, down in the old inn. Schedule an appointment, glad to talk to you. Seriously.
I may take you up on that. Okay, thanks.
Please.
All right, is there any more other questions from the board? All right, we'll move on.
My pleasure as always.
Thanks, Marvin.
Thank you, Marvin.
Cases over here.
Carry the whole desk in there.
All right, so we'll move on to board committee reports. First up is policy. I think I did.
Yes, ma'am. But I forgot to put my name on it.
Go ahead.
All right, so the policy committee, we reviewed the following policies. 6910, reporting and investigating allegations of fraud, there was no change. 7100, facilities plan, Joe looking into our annual asset checkup and asset plan with Tom. 7360, construction contract bidding and awards. Update contracted purchase monetary requirement standards to 35,000 and 20,000 respectively. Add a reference to policy number 6700 purchasing and vice versa. 7501 memorials, no change. 8110 health and safety program, no change. 8111 reporting of hazards, no change. Sheldon has recently updated the communication program. 8115 integrated pest management, no change. 8121 first aid, questions about using Narcan being a drug, item number 3 in this policy. And do we need a separate policy for field trips applying first aid and using medications? 8122 use of automatic external defibrillator, no change. 8123 hygiene precautions and procedures, no change. 8123.1 contagious diseases, no change. 8130 emergency plans, no change. 8134 emergency closings, no change. Next meeting, June 28th, will be rescheduled, date to be determined.
Any questions for Policy Committee? All right, thank you. Move on to long-range planning.
Those are mine. We had 2 meetings since our last meeting. May 30th, Steve joined the group as Deirdre is stepping off at the end of this year. We talked a lot about the Citizens Advisory Committee, and as Marvin just mentioned, we reached out to Dr. Jager to see if he'd be willing to consider taking us on again as a facilitator for the Citizens Advisory Committee. He has since accepted, and as we've learned, he helped us with the CDEP plan, and his way of promoting small group discussion makes him, we thought, ideally suited for this kind of work, because there are all kinds of people coming to the Citizens Advisory Committee. There are teachers and there are parents from across the K-12 spectrum. So what we want to be able to do is hear every voice and work in a collaborative process, which we feel Dr. Jager is well suited to help us with. There's an outstanding question about when to present financial information. I think the first meeting, which is coming up on June 25th, is going to be mostly informational and presentational, sort of why are we here and how did we get here. And prior to that, we'll be sending out a lot of information and data for the committee to read through so that they have some sense of where we've come from. And we want really to know about the priorities of our community. That's sort of the goal of the Citizens Advisory Committee. Where do we go from here based on the values of a Rhinebeck education? And how are we going to be able to deliver on those ideas given the financial constraints that we have? So some of the things that the Long Range Planning Committee have surfaced as questions include, thoughts on class size, electives, being able to take electives online, machine learning, where and how much is too much. How do we intelligently enhance the experience of kids? What are the creative ways to engage new ideas? What new programs have we put into the district in the last 5 years? What have worked well? What hasn't? Consolidation, what does that mean? Do we want to look at that? Shared services, opportunities for more in-house special education programming here, much like the classroom that we have at Chancellor. And really what choices are we going to make to support kids, and with the idea that it's all about what's best for kids. Again, we're going to give them the report card, the CDEP, part of the CDEP plan, links to long-range planning minutes, enrollment history compared to local districts, history of our budget information, free and reduced price kids, lunch kids, and where our revenue comes from. So then we met on June 8th. I can do those, or we can put these later. Whichever. Shall we stay on our roll? Okay. Okay, so as I said, June 25th is the Citizens Advisory Committee meeting, our very first. Originally, 20 people reached out and expressed interest in participating. Since then, one person had to back out. we've got 5 teachers, 15 community, well, now 14 community members, 4 unable to attend the first meeting. I think we're still waiting for a handful.
Yeah, I heard back from one in the affirmative.
Oh,
so-
good, okay, so we'll be a pretty robust group. Dr. Jager will be joining us and has suggested that our follow-up meetings happen monthly so that, you know, whatever homework needs to be done can be worked through in the intervening time. Because we've set a goal of 3 to 4 meetings total, we're hoping that this Citizens Advisory Committee will have been able to come together around a sort of generalized values, planning, that kind of thing, so that we can head into the budget season knowing, you know, what our community will support and the direction that we're trying to go. So we talked about different structures of the meeting. It's clear to all of us that different people are going to come with different sort of focal points for themselves personally. So it's possible that we'll break into smaller study groups. If there are people who are particularly interested in finance, they might, you know, form a little work study group. If there are people that are interested in technology and distance learning, maybe they sort of form a subgroup, and those conversations hopefully will bubble up questions for the larger group that we can all sort of talk through together. But long-range planning is not just going to focus on the Citizens Advisory Committee. We'll still meet through the summer every couple of weeks. Deirdre had compiled a list of sort of peer aspirant schools in New York. There are about 5 of them who seem to be roughly our size. Tom's going to put together the Forecast 5 information about them. What do they have in their schools? Why are they so exceptional in, you know, the ratings of New York State? What do they provide based on their revenues from state and local sources? So we'll start taking a look at that at our next meeting, which is in a couple of days. And then our summer planning. We talked a little bit a while ago about really pulling the budget apart. We'd like to start doing that this summer with sort of some of the more contained areas of the budget, like athletics and transportation and O&M. And then we want to talk really with the principals a little bit more about how to sort of change the dialogue around the budget, where rather than going into it saying, okay, how much do we have to cut, look at what's best for kids, what we need in the district, how we're going to provide those programs, where the resource is going to come from. If what they really want to provide, you know, is X, then maybe Y has to be run every other year, or maybe we just continue it because it's not serving kids anymore. But there need to be different conversations about where we're allocating our resources. So we're hoping that we can start those conversations with the principals this summer. And that's going to be a pretty heavy lift because it's a huge mind shift. So we're gonna hope we can bring in the crane. Our next meeting, I think, is the 14th. Deirdre won't be back yet, but Steve will be there.
Where was Friday?
Friday?
Oh, that was Thursday. No, that's the 14th.
That's the 14th.
Sorry, it's
Yeah.
14th.
Yeah. Oh, we're spending a lot of time together this week.
Questions for long-range planning? Okay, move on to curriculum. Oh, sorry, go ahead.
You can't get off the committee.
You're on it now.
I was just going to ask Tom a question.
Yes.
With this summer planning piece of looking at the schools by building, is it possible in finance that we can kind of look at those numbers at a high level of what that would shape out to with Chancellor, EMS, and the high school?
What type of numbers are we talking about? I mean, what financial numbers are you looking to do? I mean, because one of the things that we're actually in the process right now, I'm working with Christine in the office, and we've been talking about what Marvin talked about earlier about ESSA. We have to change how we account for things now, right down to the building level. Nothing up there talked about the financial side of ESSA, but it's a bear, just like he was saying, it's a bear. But we're going to have to make some changes. So, you know, we can get building specific in some areas, but in other areas we can't because we generalize things like operation and maintenance and that. But, you know, we do have a handle of who the teachers are, but We've never broken down special ed between buildings. It's just been special education.
Right.
When it comes to things like teacher aides and monitors, it's just been looked at, this is district. We have to start breaking that down so we can get that minute
Yeah, so-
data.
so is
But we
that-
can look at what we do have.
Okay, maybe starting with programs and,
Right. Yep, we can definitely look at those things, because one thing with Forecast 5, basically I've shown you really at the district level, but you can actually get down to the school building level, but it becomes very cumbersome, but it's worth looking at it. I mean, no doubt about it, especially when we talked about the aspirant group. We really get to drill down to the building level, like a Jericho isn't going to have one elementary school. It's going to have multiple ones. And we can kind of take a look at each of their buildings to see, how they perform and, what type of class sizes do they have. Because the class size in this Jericho Elementary School may be very different than this one. And a lot of times they're the same, but you never know how these neighborhood schools sometimes are, and they don't like to change them. So even I know in Arlington, the neighborhood schools haven't changed. In some places, the population has shrunk, so they have very small class sizes, where other places has ballooned with new subdivisions, and they got overflowing, So we'll have to take a look at that, but we can really drill down to the school level, and we can take a look at what type of data we have for our schools to see what's important to compare to the other schools.
Anything else for long-range planning? All right, curriculum?
Also me. Okay, so Brett came to join us and tell us about the math program that we hopefully will be able to vote on later in this evening. He was really, really enthusiastic about the study group for this math research. I think they looked at
Math task force, he called it.
Task force,
Yeah.
thank you. It started about 2 years ago, and because of all the changes with ESSA and the Next Gen rework, it sort of lay fallow for a couple of years, but is now, they spent the better part of this year looking at 6 different math programs. They started by looking at everyday math, figuring out what they want from a math program, what they weren't getting from everyday math. It really wasn't serving kids well. So this task force included teachers at every grade level, the AIS support teachers, special ed teachers, David Wolf and Brett and Fern. They kept Marvin in the loop through all of their discussions. They had all of these publishers come in and present their programs to the teachers. They whittled it down to 2 programs, Big Ideas Math and My Math, and there was unanimous support for both programs. People had personal preferences about, design or the way certain things were scaffolded, but they all agreed unanimously that either program would work beautifully at Chancellor. They picked up on Big Ideas Math, particularly because it's exploratory in nature. It actually drills down into the numbers. It drills up into the middle school. The middle school uses Big Ideas Math here so that there's no gap in language of math instruction, which is very helpful. The teachers up here have been hoping to bridge that gap more closely for years. Publisher support for the program is remarkable. The entire grade level sequence can be completed within a year, which was not the case with everyday math. It was too tightly structured to a 180-day school year. So if you needed to take a little extra time, it meant you had to skip something another day. So they're going to be able to get through the entire program in a year. Each unit has very specific language and PD for how to address ENL kids with the math program. So that's a huge bonus of this. There's an interdisciplinary approach using music and high quality picture books in teaching of math, which is really popular. Parent communication is really strong. Every lesson has a QR code on it, so when you're sitting down helping your kid do their homework, you can dial it up on your phone and get the support you need rather than going to the computer and logging on and doing all of that. So that's really fantastic. There's also a digital assessment piece that teachers can customize, so they get instant feedback on their assessments, so they know where they've done well, where the kids need more support, that kind of thing. It is not an inexpensive program. It's $62,000 over 6 years, but that covers the online membership, all teacher manuals, student consumables, manipulatives, PD, both in person and online for teachers. Brett has, with the money that he's got in his budget, grant money from Marvin, special ed money from Emily, and hopefully a couple of extra shekels from Tom. He's thinking that they can cover the cost without a problem.
Exactly.
That's what he told me.
Hopefully, middle school and high school don't need any textbooks that year.
Find some shekels, Tom.
More money, more money.
That's right. But again, he was just thrilled with the level of enthusiasm from the teachers, which I think is 9/10 of the battle. So he's really hopeful that it's going to roll out well. They want to do a complete K-5 rollout. They're not going to phase it in. So they're aware that there will need to be supports for the kids who are in sort of 3, 4, and 5, because they've been on the everyday math track for 3 years. So they're going to have to sort of shift their thinking a little bit. But they're ready and able to do that. And then they'll hopefully next summer be able to build their curriculum around it. They'll know the good, the bad, and the ugly for the program, and they'll be able to write the curriculum that goes along with the program. Next, he presented the Great Body Shop health program. We've been talking about wanting to get a more robust health curriculum at Chancellor for a bunch of years, but just didn't have the time or the personnel. But since we've kept our specials teachers whole, we are going to be able to use our PE guys to push into the classroom and deliver these Great Body Shop health classes. There are 20 to 30 units, I guess, over a 30-minute class lesson. They're developmentally appropriate, culturally sensitive, medically accurate, and they hit all the national health standards. So we had piloted it at Chancellor about 10 years ago, and teachers weren't quite ready for a full rollout, and Brett had just come in, so it sort of had fallen by the wayside. They've since done a rewrite of the curriculum, and everybody in the building is pretty excited about it. So it's a K-6 program with an annual membership fee of $3,000. We talked about the possibility of having the 6th grade units come up to middle school. Since we're paying for it, we might as well use it. And so Marvin and Joe were going to talk to John about how, when, if he could slot that in. Also, tremendous school-based communication, great school-to-home communication. There'll be letters at every new unit so that families know what's happening and being discussed in the classroom, and teachers are going to be able to sort of work with kids more specifically. Then he presented another program he'd like to pilot. It's called Second Step. It's a social emotional program. It's being used right now in Hyde Park, Arlington, Pine Plains, and Peekskill. The program's sort of based on support and preventative education rather than trying to figure out how to undo bad habits that have already been learned. And there is some backup material in your packets, actually a lot of it. So because of a grant from the feds, the New York State Mental Health Organization is offering this program for free to school districts. So we are hopeful that we can use Nora Kindley and Fawn Johnson as our specialist teachers, again, to push into classrooms and deliver these units to kids. And Brett has done a great job, I think, doing the research on all 3 of these programs with teacher support, and the Second Step and the health curriculum really directly addresses the issues that have been highlighted through CDEP and the school climate survey. So the committee was grateful for his hard work this year trying to bring that stuff up. So we don't have another meeting.
Diane?
A couple questions. This is very exciting, especially for those of us that weren't so excited about everything. So the cost, it's an upfront cost, and there's no cost until the 6 years is up?
That's our understanding.
At the 6-year mark,
Yeah.
there would be but it doesn't include curriculum, everything else. So these, the health curriculum, is that going to be delivered during the gym class now, or is this a separate? Separate.
It's gonna follow the same model we do for STEM. David Wolfen pushes into the classroom during the classroom day and works sort of in tandem with the teachers to deliver the STEM curriculum, and then they also go to the lab. But so this is going to be that same kind of model. So Kevin and Ryan will push into so-and-so's third grade class and talk about it.
Yeah, and I don't believe it's an everyday program.
No,
a
it's
couple
not.
times a
It
week,
only
maybe.
has 20 or 30
Yeah.
units through the year,
Mhm.
so it's not going to happen every day.
I mean, that particular program is consistent with the work that we started this year regarding social and emotional health. So, and that's something that they're actually going to start doing on a pilot basis this fall.
Yeah, great work going on at CLM.
Yeah, great.
Other questions? Okay, move on to the updated draft 2018-19 Board of Education meeting schedule.
If you look in your packets under 6.15, that's the schedule. I didn't want to put it in two places. So based on feedback from all of you, July 24th was a conflict for at least one of our members, possibly a second. So I've been looking at moving that meeting to July 31st to try to avoid those conflicts or potential conflicts. Tom also brought to my attention when we were going through this process that the August 14th meeting really has to stay where it is in terms of our being able to get the tax warrant and tax levy approved by the board, and then get the information to the county, get the tax bills printed out. We can't push that much later in August, and it's doubtful, if possible, but doubtful that we'd have the information a lot earlier than the 14th. So that middle meeting, that first meeting in August, in the middle of August, has always kind of been the sweet spot for having to get that job done without calling a special meeting just to do that. And then August 28th, we're kind of locked into the first 15 days of July to have an organization meeting. I know Laura's going to be away. Everybody else was available, and doing it in the week before collides with 4th of July, and it's just a messy week. So that's my recommendation to this board, to get done what we have to get done during the summer at various points. But if there's discussion about that, I mean, then that's just my recommendation. That's not I've explained what the constraints are that we have to deal with, so.
Diane, did you have your hand up?
Yes, I won't be here July 31st, but I understand the question, so I'm just letting you know.
Okay.
Anybody else? Okay, so it sounds like we're okay with that.
Yeah, I mean, there's never a perfect
Right.
summer schedule. We go through this pretty much every year. I think I'm always flabbergasted whenever we have everybody who can actually make all 4 meetings. It rarely happens, but it has happened a few times.
I have a question.
Yeah.
In May, it looks like we're meeting the first and third Wednesdays, and actually meeting on the budget vote night.
Hang on, let me get-
That would be new.
Let me just get there. Sorry. I paged away from that, so I'm going back. All right, say that again, Tom, sorry.
So typically, the budget hearing would be on May 14th, the second Tuesday, 1 week before the budget vote on May 21st, and then we'd have a regular meeting on the 28th, being the fourth Tuesday of the month. So that would be different. I'm not saying it's,
No, so we should add a meeting on the 28th. Is that what you're saying?
well, it would be May 14th would be the budget hearing 1 week before the budget vote of May 21st, and then a meeting on May 28th, a regular meeting on
Okay.
May 28th. I mean, that's how we've done it,
Okay.
typically.
Budget hearing is 2 weeks before, right?
No, it's 1 week before.
No, but-
Oh, so then
It's on
it's,
here, it says two.
so it should be
It says
May
the 7th.
14th, not the 7th.
Right, it
That's what
should
he's
be
just
May
saying, yes.
14th. There should not be a May 7th. There should be a May 14th. That will be our budget hearing and a regular meeting. 21st is the budget vote. 28th would just be our regular second meeting of the month.
So then we have 3 weeks gap between April 23rd and then May 14th.
Yes.
Yep, yep.
Which is probably why I put the 7th down there.
Yeah.
To try to even it out,
Just
but
kind of a weird.
good point.
Weird.
We'll take a look at that, just so you know, you are not adopting the meeting schedule for the entire year tonight. That happens at the organizational meeting, so we'll take a look at that. What you are adopting tonight is July 10th, July 13th, August 14th, August 28th. Just so we get our summer schedule set before we actually get into this summer schedule. But we'll take a look at that, and we'll get that fixed up before the organization meeting.
Diane?
In summer meetings, we typically set a date to workshop our goals.
Well, that's another,
Trying to get another date
it's
out.
another challenge, so, once we get this set, then I can send out something else to say, okay, let's talk about another miracle, when we all might be able to get together, and now we would have another, a different board member involved in that mix. Lisa's available for all of these meetings, but once we get these set, then we'll work on that.
May make sense to
Technical meeting.
use August 14th or 28th and just come in early if everyone's available. one of those
Possible
2
if
days,
people are available.
Instead of trying to pick a third day.
Yeah, we'll take a look.
Yeah, no kidding. Your stamina
You hear,
is
you hear, right?
obnoxious.
We're kind of used,
Yeah, not
we're
everybody.
kind of
did.
used to it now, right? At least some of us.
I was home for birthday cake last night, come back.
Yeah, right, the double jar.
All right, anything else on the schedule?
Think
All
so.
right, good news. Laura?
I have lots of good news. The first thing that happened, the Rhinebeck girls crew won the Hudson Valley League Championship for the first time ever. Their name is going to go on the cup with Arlington and Wappingers and FDR and all the schools that take it every
great.
year. So I was really excited. They were all shocked, including the guy handing the award out. But it was a really great day. It was exciting. And the academic and athletic award evenings were really, really nice. The kids have
Yeah.
worked hard. They earned all of their accolades. It was really fantastic.
Other good news? Okay, old business. Any old business?
Oh, I have another good news.
Go ahead.
No, too late.
We don't want to share anymore.
The middle school, I went to the middle school small ensemble concert, and it was charming.
I love that
It was
concert.
really sweet.
I love that
I
concert.
heard that the semifinal dance in middle school was a
yeah.
success, highly attended.
Oh, yeah, that's it.
Excellent.
All right. Public comment? None, okay. Other?
Yes, I have another. I had sent forward to you an email that I got on Saturday from Mayor Bassett regarding a grant that the village is looking to apply for. It's got a very tight timeline, but it does seem like a worthy goal, specifically a grant to construct some additional sidewalks to connect the north end of the village with both of our schools here, kind of on the south end. Maybe it isn't south, maybe it's east or west, I'm not sure. Anyway, to connect from up near the fairgrounds through the village and end at both the high school, middle school, and then continue further on to Chancellor. I provided to you at your places a very rough first pass diagram that they provided to us. They're very interested in any feedback that we might have. I want to study this a little bit more. But what they're really looking for is a couple of letters from me as the superintendent of schools, and from, I think he'd already approached Deirdre, but somebody representing the board. I guess one of the many things you get points for in this process of rating these applications is community buy-in and support, which our letters would be crucial to doing that. The focus of the goal is both walking and biking safety, so that obviously impacts our kids to a great degree. They're talking about a combination of sidewalks and bike lanes, which are, separate painted, bike lanes on some of the streets, not on every street, of course. On that.
Is that Shallows on here? Is that what
Yeah.
it is?
Yeah, it's Sharrows, not Shallows, but, yeah.
Okay, so that's for the bike lane.
Yes, that's right. And the bike lanes are delineated with dotted lines, and the solid lines delineate sidewalks. We all know that there's a great need for safe sidewalks. Many of the sidewalks that exist are not in very good shape, and many of the streets in the village don't have sidewalks. So it's about it's $100 million grant pot.
No, not for just this.
No, the program, not just.
$100 million.
So they would be.
Gold plated.
They would be competing for a chunk of that money. The grant cycle is every 2 years, so it's hit it now or wait another 2 years to apply. The deadline is the 28th of June. So they've got a lot of heavy lifting to do, but I wanted to make sure that I provided the board with some information before I commit in a letter to supporting this on behalf of the school. I mean, having learned more today, I feel pretty confident that we should support their effort. But I did want to bring it to this board just to make sure, A, you knew, and B, if anybody had any serious reservations, I wouldn't want to go ahead and commit on the part of the board to support this and then have the board say, are you out of your mind? This is nuts. We originally thought it was going to be, because I had the same impression as Mark, that it would, no, I did too, because it wasn't quite clear from the original email, but I was thinking it was going to be a combination of sidewalks here, bike lanes there, but the way they've delineated to us, it's going to be sidewalks all the way and bike lanes probably all the way too. It will start roughly at Mulberry Street up near the fairgrounds. We'll go down Mulberry, cross Route 308 to Parsonage. They also have a grant that they've already applied for to put a crosswalk by where the deli used to be, which would have not only the crosswalk, but also the blinking lights that actually attempt to get the attention of motorists. Well, I only say that because some of the other crosswalks, I'm seeing people blow right through them.
Just trying to speed up when they get to where the deli was.
Yeah.
They're out of the village.
Yeah. Same thing happens by the bagel shop where they're coming in or going out. They're speeding up there. Unfortunately, there's no signaling there, but that's another grant for another day. And then down Parsonage to North Park for high school kids coming up North Park, and then continuing down to Knollwood, and then a turn on Knollwood, and again, sidewalks connecting to the existing sidewalks there. It's a pretty ambitious project. They're pretty excited about it, and I feel we should do everything we can to support their efforts. So anyway, just wanted to make sure you guys are all aware of what is in the works, and unless I hear a hue and cry here at this table, my inclination is to support them.
Thank you for your
The projects have to be a minimum of $250,000 and a maximum of $5 million. So they have I guess, a number in mind of how much they think it will cost to build the sidewalks where they need them.
Yeah.
So they're prepared to submit the grant proposal.
I mean, they've already done a lot of the legwork for other projects that didn't get accepted, like they had applied for that crosswalk near the former deli last year, and they didn't get approved, but they have all the work done, so they don't have to redo that. They just submit that chunk of it, and the cost for the bike lanes is relatively inexpensive. It's just painting. It's striping and painting. The real expense is but they also did that project, putting a sidewalk going up West Market Street to the library. So again, they have a per foot cost already figured out. So a lot of the legwork they've already done for other projects. They're just going to pull it together and repurpose that data for.
Just add 20%.
Well. So anyway, I don't want to belabor the point, but that's what's going on.
I think it's great.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's fantastic.
Agreed. So, all right, we'll move forward with supporting them. And no money to the school. I mean, Gary made it very clear that this would all come from this grant. So, it's great. Okay, yeah, you're welcome.
Other, I know you mentioned in the packet about the convention.
Oh, well, it's coming up, and those of you who attended the convention or asked to be registered know that the hotels start filling up pretty early. So I would suggest that if you're interested, you check your calendars and let me know, and we won't wait for everybody because we'll get boxed out of lodging. So I would ask you to consider whether you want to attend. If you do, let Whitney know at your earliest convenience, preferably within the next couple of weeks, and then we have to start making those reservations and committing money to attend. It's in New York City this year, so it's not a long van ride off into Western New York. But.
Is there wisdom in considering not staying over? I mean, could we do sort of the cost analysis, getting trains back and forth? I'm just thinking, the hotel might be more, if we're trying to save money so that we can put the board's budget in other places if necessary, then.
Yeah, you could probably talk with Mary Ann, because she did, all of the research on it the last time we went to New York, so she might have some idea to give you a jump start on that. But yeah, we can look at that.
Try to shave some pennies.
And it's Thursday, Friday, Saturday.
Do you remember the dates?
October 25th to 27th, I think.
Yeah.
I think I know the answer to this, but it's all or nothing, right? You just pay for the 3 days.
That's correct.
Go one day.
That's correct. Yep. Yeah, they don't have a.
Should allow for that.
Well,
Thursday.
but they don't. So. Yeah, they never have that I can recall. So it's it's an all-inclusive ticket or nothing. So let me know. We'll wait to hear from you, but please don't wait too long.
Yeah, it's a really great conference. If you can make it.
Okay, thank you, Mark, for reminding me about that.
So you need to know by before the 30th.
I would prefer to know before, the sooner the better, because there'll be a line already to. And last time or two we went to New York and we stayed over, we didn't even get the hotel, the NISBA rates or the NISBA lodging, because they were they were already filled up. I mean, we stayed at another hotel, but, so yeah, the sooner we know, the sooner we can kind of put together some options for you guys. Okay.
All right, anything else in other? All right, so we'll move on to the action items. There's only one item in the consent agenda, so may I have a motion to approve the consent agenda?
So moved.
Second.
All those in favor? That's unanimous, that motion passes. We have a motion upon the recommendation of the superintendent of schools to adopt the following resolution. Whereas the Board of Education has determined that it wishes to fill a vacancy on the board by exercising its option of appointing a qualified person to fill the vacancy. Therefore be it resolved that the Board of Education, due to the resignation of Deirdre Dalbert from her position as trustee of the Board of Education, effective June 30th, 2018, hereby appoints former Board of Education trustee Lisa Rosenthal to fill the board vacancy and to serve effective July 1st, 2018, until the next annual election of board members on May 21st, 2019, the oath of office to be administered by the clerk and the oath book signed.
So moved.
Second.
Any discussion? I'd like to thank Lisa for stepping up to fill that position. All those in favor? That's unanimous. That motion passes. We have a motion upon the recommendation of the superintendent of schools to approve a leave request under the Family and Medical Leave Act from Kelly Lynch to commence on or about August 5th, 2018, with such leave to be taken as paid medical leave through the period of disability as certified in writing through October 29th, 2018, to the extent of her accrued sick leave, and thereafter such leave to be taken as unpaid child care leave or thereabouts as requested in writing.
So moved.
Second.
Any discussion? All those in favor? That's unanimous. That motion passes. We have a motion upon the recommendation of the superintendent of schools to approve the request for an additional summer study grant 2018 in accordance with the Rhinebeck Teachers Association agreement.
So moved.
Second.
Any discussion? All those in favor? That's unanimous. That motion passes. We have a motion upon the recommendation of the superintendent of schools to approve the following resolution. Whereas the safety and security of students and staff is the single most important responsibility of our school district, and whereas with the increasing instances of threats and serious incidents in schools across the nation, school districts are faced with funding extensive new safety initiatives, and whereas trained school resource officers have played an instrumental and life-saving role in neutralizing and resolving serious incidents in schools, and whereas the wide range of social, emotional, and mental health needs of students are constantly increasing, adding additional financial burdens and becoming daily responsibilities of public schools. Therefore be it resolved that the Rhinebeck Central School District implores the New York State Assembly and Governor to partner with the New York State Senate and immediately approve the Senate's Protecting Our Schools legislation that provides desperately needed resources and funding for safety, security, and mental health support for schools across our state.
So moved.
Second.
Any discussion?
Just to let the board know, I have already received a call from one of Assemblyman Cahill's aides. You may recall I sent a letter to the three of our legislators, received a call from one of his aides talking to me about this, asking if I had any information about it, and I've already passed that along to them. Not heard from Assemblywoman Barrett's office, and I did talk with Sue Serino about the legislation when I attended her opioid epidemic summit down at the Samuel F.B. Morse home a couple of weeks ago. So they're aware. Many of the school districts in our larger region have had their boards adopt resolutions, and if this board adopts this, I will send those same three a copy of this resolution, just trying to amp up the pressure here as the session is drawing to a close. So it couldn't hurt, might help. So that's all I have to say about that.
All right. Any other discussion? All those in favor? That's 5. Abstention?
Yeah.
Okay. Okay, that motion passes. May I have a motion upon the recommendation of the superintendent of schools to approve summer curriculum program and clerical work?
So moved.
Second?
Any discussion? Steve?
Can I just ask a question? Does this number of the total that are on those 2 pages come out of one line item in the budget? And if this is over that line item, under that line item?
It's not over the line item. Basically, the process is that Marvin gets the applications, they come through the principals to Marvin, he reviews them all, he puts them on like a grid, then he sits down with me, he reviews them all with me, and then we go through and I would say a fair number of them have number of hours, i.e. dollars attached to them that either he or I or both of us feel they ought to be able to do this without, in less than 80 hours or 30 hours or whatever. So we go back and he pares the hours down to be sure we're under our budget amount. So I have every confidence in Marvin that he knows what the number is and he's sliced back hours to make sure we're under that number.
He also has access to title grants, in which he does budget money for this purpose too. So it's just not a general fund expenditure.
Thank you. Another example of that is, for example, some of them are special ed related, so they will come out of the special ed grant, for example.
Yep.
Thanks.
Yep.
Title I grant,
Yeah.
something along
Yeah.
those lines. Yep.
Laura, did you have your hand up?
Yeah, I'd like to move to table this.
Okay. Is there a second to that?
A second.
Okay. All those in favor of tabling this motion? Okay, that's unanimous. The motion is tabled. May I have a motion upon the recommendation of the superintendent of schools to accept the grant award from the Rhinebeck Science Foundation submitted by Brenda Palmetier in support of funding for the 6th grade Bronx Zoo field trip in the amount of $1,500 as stipulated?
So moved.
Second?
Any discussion? And thank you to the Rhinebeck Science Foundation for funding this grant. All those in favor? That's unanimous. That motion passes. May I have a motion upon the recommendation of the superintendent of schools to approve additional summer 2018 service providers for students requiring year-round academic support?
So moved.
Second?
Any discussion? All those in favor? That's unanimous. That motion passes. May I have a motion upon the recommendation of the superintendent of schools to approve an additional 2018-19 course enrollment waiver?
So moved.
Second?
Any discussion? All those in favor? That's unanimous. That motion passes. May I have a motion upon the recommendation of the superintendent of schools to approve the list of additional emergency conditional substitute teachers and substitute non-instructional staff for the 2017-18 school year?
So moved.
Second?
Any discussion? All those in favor? That's unanimous. That motion passes. May I have a motion upon the recommendation of the superintendent of schools to accept the grant award from the Rhinebeck PTSO for the 2017-18 Annual Principals Fund in the amount of $1,500, $500 for each school as stipulated?
So moved.
Second?
Any discussion? Thank you for the PTSO for this grant. All those in favor? That's unanimous. That motion passes. May I have a motion upon the recommendation of the superintendent of schools to approve the recommendation of the CLS Math Task Force to purchase the Big Ideas Math Modeling Real Life Larson and Boswell Big Ideas Learning Incorporated 2018 Mathematics Textbook Series for use and implementation in grades K to 5, starting with the 2018-19 school year?
So moved.
Second?
Any discussion? All those in favor? That's unanimous. That motion passes. May I have a motion upon the recommendation of the superintendent of schools to clarify the approval of the probationary appointment of Shauna Cawley to the civil service position of guidance aide assigned to the Bulkley Middle School as to the 26-week probationary period effective July 9, 2018 on step 5, $42,374 in accordance with the ANI salary schedule for 2017-18.
So moved.
Second?
Joe?
And just to let you know, the only thing that's changed there is adding the 26-week probationary period. We left it out of the action item at our last board meeting, so I want to make sure we cover our bases there. Right, Whitney?
All those in favor?
Whitney didn't do anything wrong, I guess. I was the one who left it off. She brought it to my
She probably
attention,
figured
so.
it out, yeah.
Yes.
That's unanimous, that motion passes. We have a motion to approve modifications to the superintendent of schools and the assistant superintendent of support services, terms and condition of employment, effective July 1st, 2017.
Period.
So moved.
Second.
Okay? Any discussion? All those in favor? That's unanimous, that motion passes. May I have a motion upon the recommendation of the superintendent of schools to approve the summer 2018 Board of Education meeting schedule?
So moved.
Second.
Any discussion? All those in favor? That's unanimous, that motion passes. May I have a motion upon the recommendation of the superintendent of schools to accept the donation of 6 metal frames with hardware and a mat cutter to the Rhinebeck High School Art Department, valued at approximately $250 from Mr. Carl Paris.
So moved.
Second.
Any discussion? Thank you, Mr. Paris, for your donation. All those in favor? That's unanimous, that motion passes. May I have a motion to move into executive session for the purpose of the discussion of bargaining unit negotiations?
So moved.
Second.
All those in favor? That's unanimous, that motion passes.